Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next in our seasonal series of Zoom talks. It's delighted to welcome Susan Taylor and Graham Stockdale, even more so as their book has won a large gold at the very recent ABPS National at the Royal last week. And it's a truly fascinating story of this island, which I described as relatively modern, which probably reflects my philatelic preferences of somewhat 19th century. But it's, to me, a relatively modern period, though, in fact, over 50 years ago now. So, Susan, please do tell us all about it.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, especially our friends at the Anguilla Postal Services and anyone else out in the Caribbean who's joined us this afternoon. I think there are one or two names there I've seen. We also want to say hello to Julian, who was the third co-author. He's unable to join us here, but we hope he'll be able to watch this presentation. And we hope that this presentation will bring you some tropical sunshine today. Anguilla is a small island. It's the most northerly of the Leeward Islands. It's only 18 by 13 miles in size, and it has a population of 16,000. It's a British overseas territory. And it may be small, but it packs a real punch when it comes down to its philatelic story. Anguilla was discovered by Columbus in the 1490s, and it was settled as a British colony in 1650. It's the upper of the two islands circled on the screen here. In 1825, Britain forced Anguilla's union with St. Kitts. Subsequently, in 1871, with St. Kitts, it became a part of the federated colony of the Leeward Islands. What we want you to observe from this map is that there are many other islands, for example, St. Martin and St. Bart's, that are much nearer to Anguilla than St. Kitts, which is 70 miles away from Anguilla. Because of its northerly location, Anguilla is frequently affected by destructive hurricanes with high winds and heavy rainfall. But otherwise, the island is very dry. It has less than 1,000 millimeters of rain a year. The soil is poor quality, and it was never much good for plantation crops. There are some natural resources, or there were. There was Sombrero Island just off Anguilla, which had guano, but that was soon exhausted. There is a salt lake that produced salt for Trinidad's oil industry at one stage, but that ceased many years ago. What the island does have is amazingly beautiful beaches, an active fishing industry that delivers the best spiny-tailed lobsters to restaurants across the world, and an active boat-building tradition. So unsurprisingly, tourism is big business for the island. Settlers on the island maintained family and business contacts. However, there are very few examples of early mail so far. The earliest example is the 1837 Mary Armstrong letter, which is shown here. The pastor's wife cross-scribed her letter, which does make it clear that mail was travelling to and from Anguilla via the St. Kitts packet. The plantation owners led Anguilla's first petition against union with St. Kitts in 1825. And that petition is depicted in the small stamp bottom right that you see here. Benjamin Gums, Anguilla's then governor and plantation owner, filed the petition. Coleridge met Gums in 1825, as in his account of 6 months in the West Indies. He described Gums as an old man, venerable of his white hairs, sore eyes, and lack of teeth. Hardly the most attractive proposition. However, Gums fathered children by his enslaved nannies. He did bequest lands and slaves to these nannies and their children. A dispute followed over his estate, which provides us with another early letter from the island, as you see here. It's not clear whether stamps were used on Anguilla prior to 1900, but stationary postcards certainly were used. This 1.5 penny postcard was sent by Samuel Guns, the island's then policeman, and doubtless a descendant of Benjamin. He sent it in 1885. The police station was at Crocus Hill, in the same buildings as the courthouse and the first post office. The stone walls that you see in the photograph here are all that remain of the original Crocus Hill buildings. From 1900, there is evidence of post from Anguilla. St. Kitts and Leeward Island stamps were used interchangeably. Anguilla had its own postmarks as shown here. In 1900, it used AN with a St. Kitts cancel. In 1924, it used A with St. Kitts cancel again. And then in 1927, it used Anguilla Valley with a star. Anguilla Valley is the island's main town. Examples of these early postmarks are not easy to come by, so if you're lucky enough to be rummaging through early St. Kitts or Leeward Isle stamps, keep a keen eye out for these postmarks. In 1928, 4 village post offices were opened, in addition to the main Valley post office. They were called Blowing Point, Forest, East End and Road, and each had their own postmark. Mail from these post offices is extremely rare. It seems what exists today was posted to and saved by early philatelists. Here's a nice example of mail postmarked from Road. So far, we know of only 13 covers bearing these village postmarks. They are rarer than the 1967 overprints. There are only 3 addressees: Ralph Moffat in California, T. Marshall in Manchester, and Bruce in Australia. These post offices disappeared in 1931, probably following a severe hurricane. However, they continued to exist on the books until 1939. When this came to light, they were formally discontinued.
Early air mails, in common with other Caribbean islands, the 1930s saw an air mail service. There were not direct flights, but some parts of the postal journey was by air. This interesting philatelic cover at top here, from Road on the 15th of July 1930 to the Virgin Islands, went via St. Kitts. It was then returned to the Anguilla Forest Post Office and onwards again to Mr. Cedar in Tacamo, which went via St. John's. This is probably the only known cover with 2 village hand stamps. The second example is a cover addressed to Martinique, but was also returned. Anguilla was in a key position. Today, 20% of the world's shipping passes through Anguilla's waters en route to the Panama Canal. And during World War II, mail sent to St. Kitts for centering all the time, but Anguilla seemed to have had its own censor allocation, which was number 6 of the CH2 type. And this appears on the bottom cover with the big circle cancel. There appears to be around 6 only copies known to date. And the bottom cover was redirected to Florida. After the war, once the celebrations were over, Britain was on its knees. It put out a call for help from colonies, and many Anguillans travelled to Britain as part of the Windrush generation. Anguillans also travelled abroad to other places due to a lack of employment on the island and remitted money back to their ancestors and elders back home. In 1938, John Gums, in a memorandum to the Moyne Commissioners, pleaded, "Please favour us with a postage stamp of our own." His appeal was ignored. It took a further 10 years in 1948 before the new St Kitts higher values, 10 shilling and pound, as seen at top right here, actually showed a map of Anguilla. Then a set of 6 was issued with an overprint in November 1950. However, they were only in use until the 31st of January 1951, because on the 28th of November 1950, just 18 days after the first day cover here, the British West Indies dollar became the official currency. There was an array of stamps used in Anguilla. Leeward Islands and St Kitts Nevis Anguilla stamps were used on Anguilla, and all mail going via St Kitts. The QEII cover shown here has both Leeward Islands and St Christopher Nevis Anguilla stamps, and they're all accepted on one cover. Anguilla finally appeared on the name line of definitives issued on the 14th of June 1952. These stamps featured King George VI, but were issued after his death. There is only one stamp in the entire set, the $1.20, which is outlined in blue, which shows a scene from Anguilla. Anguilla, as part of St Kitts Nevis Anguilla Crown State, was declared part of the West Indies Federation on the 22nd of April 1958. A British Caribbean omnibus stamp series was issued, as you see at the bottom there. However, within 3 years, it was all over. Jamaica abdicated, which caused financial issues, and Eric Williams, the PM of Trinidad, said 1 from 10 equals 0 and promptly left. So the thing collapsed. March the 1st, 1954 saw a new QE2 set of definitives issued, and the top cover shows part of this set on an airmail cover postmarked Anguilla Valley in 1961. Other commemoratives were issued, including the bottom cover, to mark Alexandra Hamilton's bicentenary as an example. On the 20th of November, the 1963 St Kitts Nevis Anguilla definitives were released and are shown on the next page. This new definitive set was so popular for their bright colours and clear depictions. 7 of the 16 values had inverted watermarks, and 2 values had minor colour varieties as well. However, this is the set which would define Anguilla in 1967. Britain was still looking to rid itself of dependencies, so proposed an associated statehood for St Christopher Nevis and Anguilla. A committee was set up to discuss the proposal, but no Anguillians were invited. Resentment was building on Anguilla after years of neglect. Monies due to them were withheld by St Kitts, and there were no telephones and few homes had a water supply. The hospital had no lights, and the roads and runway were no more than rough tracks. When statehood went ahead in 1967 and stamps and cancellors were issued, as shown on the cover and below, there was very little evidence that they'd ever been used on Anguilla until very recently, until I found an example last month, which I'll hold up and show to the camera. You can see that okay? So that is the only known example we've found to date with the statehood cancellation used in Anguilla.
Have a look at this cover. It went in the mail on the 24th of April, 1967. That was after statehood and before the island declared independence. Such covers are very rare. Anguilla declared independence on the 30th of May, 1967. St. Kitts immediately ceased all banking and postal services to the island. This was not just an inconvenience, it was an emergency. Elders depended on money remittances, and teachers, hospital staff, refuse workers, and even the postal workers were not being paid, to say the least of communications with family abroad. Arrangements were made for the mail to go via a fishing boat to St. Martin, or St. Martin, initially. Postage stamps ran out, so 2 date stamps were used, as shown on the bottom of these covers. A large circle, which was used infrequently, and a violet rectangle with a space for the postal rate, as also shown on that cover. No phones, newspapers, radio stations existed on the island, so a man called Atlin Harrigan started a small newspaper, first publishing 270 copies on the 27th of September 1967. By 1980, the Beacon was issuing 8,000 copies across the world. The Beacon played a key role in promoting Anguilla's stamp sales. As you can see here, this is a copy going to the philatelist Brian Brooks. Stamp revenues quickly became a vital source of income for the island, for example, raising £60,000 in the 1967 to 68 period. This picture at the bottom shows Harrigan's home. Sadly, it was badly damaged by Hurricane Irma in 2018, but we did find it when we visited the island. An air service to America via St. Thomas started in 1967, whereby mail carrying American stamps was cancelled with an Anguillan Airways mark and put into a post box on arrival in St. Thomas. But the island badly needed its own stamps and an effective postal system. Some weird and wonderful proposals were put forward, and here is an example. Eventually, John Lister Limited and the company's agent, John King, were appointed as Anguilla's philatelic agents. John King obtained 35,775 of the St. Kitts Nevis Anguilla definitives from the Crown agents. These and the remaining stamps were taken from the magistrate's safe on Anguilla and were flown to St. Thomas, where the St. Kitts Nevis Anguilla banner was obliterated and overprinted Independent Anguilla before being launched on the 4th of September 1967. Whilst 1,431 sheets of stamps were overprinted, there were varying numbers of each value. For example, there were 4,250 2-cent stamps, but only 100 of the 60 cents. Some inverted watermarks exist on the 3-cent and 25-cent values, as shown here. Mint complete sets of all the values are extremely rare, and it is thought that only about 10 sets exist. Blocks of higher values are rare. There is a shift variety that carries the word Anguilla to the left on some of the stamps, as shown here on the 3 cents. At around the same time, in early September, 4,040 of the St Kitts Nevis Anguilla 5-cent and 15-cent aerograms were overprinted independent Anguilla in red by Ace printers on St Thomas. There are two positions for the overprints. One is central and one is to the left. It is known that there are 5 black overprints, all unused in existence. These are believed to be from a printer's file copy from the archives of McCorquodale & Co. John Lister needed a printer to produce Anguilla's stamps. Alden and Mowbray seemed ideal. They had a modern factory and a secure area for printing. And they produced these, the first definitives for Anguilla, which came out on the 27th of November 1967. But in 1970, imperforate sheets were found being sold in Oxford's Woolworth store cafe. This created quite a furore. However, imperforates are still available on the internet today from an American eBay vendor. The police were involved, and the contract was transferred initially to Litho Format and Questa, then others, including the Cott Printery in Barbados and Carter Security, who produced many of the Royal Mail stamps. The new definitives were issued in November 1967, but quickly sold out, so the boxed hand stamp was brought back into use temporarily, as shown in the top of this screen. If you look carefully, you'll see that this example is addressed to Joe Urch. Many philatelists visited Anguilla following the island's declaration of independence, but Joe Urch is thought to have made the most money out of his visit. The son of a vicar, Urch was able to use his church connections to have the Anguilla runway cleared so that he could visit in September. He had the island doctor and Canon Carson buy complete sets of the overprints in addition to himself. He also bought other blocks of the overprints, and these he later sold at great profit, firstly to members of his investor club, as shown by the part of the letter that you have there, and later at auction. When Ken Harrigan, the postmaster of Anguilla, learnt of Urch's activities, he introduced a rule that all overprint stamps had to be bought on cover to protect stamp supplies for the islanders, because they needed to use them to make contact with their families and so on. The island issued many stamps in the months that followed, as shown here. Ships, birds, girl guides, and Christmas stamps are illustrated here. Anguilla's colourful stamps were very popular with philatelists, and they raised vital revenues for the island. By January 1969, Anguillans were growing frustrated with the lack of progress on the talks with British and St Kitts authorities. So when talks broke down, the November 1967 definitives were overprinted Independence January 1969. The definitive stamps were known locally as the rum drinking set because of the image of a man drinking from a coconut on the $2.50 stamp. Stanley Gibbons were reluctant to catalogue these overprints and eventually only listed some of them on the grounds that they had not been sold for commercial use. However, we have found examples of all of these overprinted stamps being used commercially, except for the $2.50. Scots list all of the stamps, and we hope that Stanley Gibbons will consider doing the same.
And here, to illustrate the point, we have a $5 of the overprint set being used on a registered cover to France. Therefore, SG listing only up to the 40 cent really needs to be corrected. This brings us on to March 1969, when talks broke down and William Whitelock, the English diplomat, offended the islanders, he was forced off the island by gunpoint. As a result, the British overreacted and initiated what became known as Operation Sheepskin. The army, paratroopers and the Metropolitan Police invaded the island. They were met with a press wall and a friendly face rather than resistance. It soon became quickly clear that the role of the forces was to change what they saw was a complete mess on the island and set about repairing the infrastructure. The paras were quickly replaced by engineers instead. The forces used a field post office, FPO 1046, and this postcard in the middle at the bottom here was from a PC called Ginger to his police friends at East Ham, and it states that they have been told to drink an awful lot of liquid. What more does one want? This was the kind of thing that happened there, and they mingled in with the locals very quickly. The camp finally closed in September 1971. St. Kitts contacted the UPU in February 1969, requesting that Anguillan stamps be declared invalid, and in March, the Postmaster General in the UK was requested to return to sender all Anguillan mail. The cover was posted on the 18th of March, which you see here, just hours before the invasion, and was returned on the 11th of April with this cover undelivered with a standard letter enclosing stating all surface and air mail services between St. Kitts and Anguilla have been suspended. This is a typed letter which they used for eastern Nigeria, and they forgot to change it. This situation, though, was resolved very quickly soon afterwards. So the talking took a long time. May 67 declared independent. Jan 69 declared independent again to emphasise the point. February 76, a new constitution came into effect, giving Anguillans some power. General elections were held and a ministerial system was introduced. The 1972 set were then overprinted with new Constitution 1976, with some values overprinted with new values. This led to some very interesting varieties. As you see at the bottom, the word constitution, the second O was in italics on some rows. There was one value on some sheets where the 3 cent was completely omitted. At present, there are 2 unique varieties, a missing 2 cent overprint and a 15 cent with the value blocked out as shown here. Although there was a new constitution in 76, it was only on the 19th of December 1980 that the Anguillan Act finally ended the St. Kitts Nevis Anguilla arrangement. However, it did not take effect until the 1st of April 82. That's some 15 years after the 1967 set. This set, issued on the 19th of December 1980, shows the current definitive set overprinted with the word Separation 1980. Also in 1980, a new short set of 5 commemoratives were issued showing various events that led up to the final separation, including a new Anguillan flag and a blockaded airport in 1967. And you will recognise the 18 cent from the beginning of this presentation. Throughout the period 1967 to 1980, St. Kitts continued to issue St. Kitts, Nevis and Anguilla stamps up until the separation. On the 23rd of June 1980, St. Kitts finally issued their own overprinted stamps, as shown here. We cannot not mention Ken Harrigan, the postmaster at the time. He was postmaster during the Revolution and wrote many letters clarifying the postal arrangements at the time. He realised early on that he needed the overprint stamps for use in the post office, and mint stamps would only be issued when people came into the PO to send out outgoing letters. This was very clever. It was a move because the overprints nearly lasted until the 27th of November, when the first Anguillan stamps actually appeared. In 1969, his letters were often stamped with the Oval Department of Post's hand stamp. It had an interesting error, W1 instead of WI. Anguillans had travelled and settled far across the world. Many Anguillians sent remittances back home, and during the Revolution period, it enabled the islanders to keep in touch with the outside world. This was particularly important when they had no telephones, no radio station, or other communication outlets. But it's worth remembering that this mail service was key to the islanders going back to the 1800s. In 1971, the Post Office opened a travelling branch to offer postal services to outlying districts. The TPO branch used its own CDS and a blue printed and numbered registry label. There were 3 points on the island to deliver and collect mail, and were collected twice a week. It offered sales of stamp cancellations of mail, and then it was taken back to the main post office to be distributed. Today, most of the mail is metered, and the last issue of new stamps was in October 2016. So we have a complete picture here because they're no longer issuing stamps. Whilst not used much for postage purposes, the demand for Anguillan stamps remains strong amongst philatelists. These latest stamps are very hard to find, and SG values them at 4 times face value and are possibly Anguilla's last ever set of stamps. They haven't now issued ones for 8 years. So, we felt that the island needed a comprehensive record of the role stamps and its postal services played in its history, and that's why we wrote the book. Copies can be obtained from pennymeadbooks.com if you want the whole story, but we hope today's presentation has given you an overall perspective. Many thanks to all of you for joining us today, and that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Graham and Susan. Thank you. Now, so far, I don't see anybody raise any questions in the chat. So, Simon?
One thing we might do, though, is because I don't think anyone will have actually seen that thing you were trying to hold up, Graham.
Ah, right.
Because we would have had to interrupt the slideshow.
Yeah,
Oh.
You could perhaps treat us to that.
Shall I do it now?
Yes, please.
Yeah, go on. Ah.
That is the cancel that they didn't really want to use at all.
Oh, right. Yes, the one that has the statehold on there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
It's the only Anguillan statehood cancel we've ever found.
Mm.
And it was in an auction a couple of weeks ago.
Is that to a dealer? Was that sent to, how did that one happen?
Sorry, which one?
Was that sent to a dealer? How did that one happen then?
No, this is actually a postally used one to one of the people who had moved off the island. So it's actually a commercial cover.
There,
I
there
don't
was,
I don't know how they got it.
there was a
actually.
family called Richardson, and we've discovered there were quite a lot of family mail between members of this family. They wrote to each other, and this is a lovely example of that.
Wow.
Good.
It's rather a shame we can't prove they're directly related to you, Marcia.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on a call. Can you repeat, please?
We were just saying that we had this really special cover, which is the only known example of Anguillan mail with a statehood print on it. Did you see that when Graham held it up?
Yes, I did. I did.
Yeah, and then John and Simon asked whether it was actually a philatelic cover, and we said no, it was sent to a family that was living in New York, the Richardson family. And I said, it's a shame we can't prove that it was directly related to you.
I don't think so, but it could be.
Yeah.
So it's only 15,000, 16,000 persons, so we maybe are related here.
Yeah.
There's
Good.
obviously quite a lot of gums on Anguilla.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
a popular name as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Right.
Yeah, there are a few families that have quite a strong presence on the island. Gum and Richardson are amongst them, and their origins go right back to the original plantation or traders.
Good. So we got anybody who didn't want to put their question? Oh, we've got a hand up there. I can see from.
Oh yes, Jürgen. Do you have a question, Jürgen?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for great presentation. I have to confess I had to check the map first, where exactly Anguilla might be, so I was mistaken, I have to confess. Just the area of the world was right, but very insightful what you told us, and I never had imagined that the history is so diverse in such a short time frame, and the philatelic samples you showed have been really intriguing to me, although I never considered collecting Anguilla, but learning is always possible. And yeah, great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, shall I draw the formal bit to a close, Mark?
Yes. Yes.
And thank Susan and Graham very much. We will be sending our appreciation in the usual way, just as soon as the building gets back to its usual services. Some of you may not be aware, but we've had an electric failure earlier on in the day that's had to be overcome. So thank you, Susan and Graham, for overcoming that. And our apologies that we can't, as a result, show you in the usual way as we would on the screen, but it will be coming out. And you've got a much more important certificate for your large gold anyway. So thank you very much indeed for this afternoon.